It's new play day on Shakesyear. Today we get to start in on Henry VI Part 3. It's the Return of the Jedi of the Henry VI trilogy. And this one is good. It's really good. And it starts out with a bang because unlike Stephen Moffat, Shakespeare knew how to pick up a sequel where the previous play left off. So today we get to hear from Queen Margaret, which is also super fun because how often is the first monologue of a play a female character? Almost never. So anyway, we get to hear from her, but this monologue happens quite a ways into Act 1, Scene 1, because Henry VI Part 2 ended with the King and Queen and young Clifford fleeing to London, and York and Warwick and Salisbury and a bunch of other people, his sons Richard and Edward, all like following him. So Act 1, Scene 1 of Henry VI Part 3, amazingly, starts in London, sort of at the end of that, hey, let's get back to London thing. Except York and his party get there first, and they're like, how did we beat the king here? They're like, not exactly sure. He must have come and then gone somewhere else to hide or something, whatever. How many people did we kill? And they each sort of do a, I killed this guy and I killed this guy, being some important guys, until Richard, the Duke of York's youngest son, third son, who has a hunchback, who's going to be important in a future play. He's also important in this one, but anyway, he holds up a head and he's like, this is what I did. And they're like, okay, Richard wins. He did the best. All right, great. So where's the king? And the king comes in and they're like, okay, so, oh, sorry, before the king comes in, they're like, hey, you know, you're here in London now and you're on the throne, so like, why don't you actually go sit on the throne? So the Duke of York goes and sits on the throne and he puts the crown on his head. And then the king and the queen and young Clifford come in, and the king is like, excuse me, you're in my seat. If you could get down and kneel to me because I am your king. And York is like, no, 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 no. I'm your king, you should kneel to me. And there's a lot of smack talk that goes back and forth between the two sides where they're saying, you should bow to us, you should bow to us, no. And it's all really short bits of dialogue, so it goes by really fast as they're getting at each other. And York is like, but this whole family thing, which he doesn't get into, again, because we've already heard it a million times, he's like, the whole family thing means that I am the rightful heir. And King Henry is like, no, I'm the rightful heir because I was crowned when I was 9 months old because my father was the king who died and his father was the king before that, so I am the rightful heir. And they're like, yeah, but your grandfather got the crown like by stealing it. And he's like, no, it was actually Richard II gave Henry IV the crown. And they're like, yeah, but he didn't willfully give it. He had to abdicate the throne. And they're like, well, but if he had given it willingly, like, does that change the matter? Like, can't a king select an heir? And they're like, well, maybe, but that's weird. And the king actually starts to get nervous, and he starts to think that York actually does have the more legit claim to the throne because the king is the grandson of a usurper, I guess. So he starts to get, and he's like, what do I do? What do I do? So he eventually strikes a deal, and he says, okay, Richard, Duke of York, you can be king once I'm dead, and the crown can then stay with your family lineage all the way, the rest of the way down the line. And everybody's like, what? And the Duke of York is like, yeah, okay. And the king's like, but you cannot try to kill me. And nobody that you know can try to kill me. Like, I have to just live out my life the way that I live out my life. And once I'm dead, I name you my heir. You would get the crown, and then it would get passed down through your family. And the Duke is like, yeah, I can get behind that. Okay, so we'll consider it done. And they shake hands, and they think that the War of the Roses is over. But, and this is a great big but, King Henry has sons at this point. He also has a son named Edward, who is next in line for the throne. So once they've shaken hands and part ways, York and his team go off and they're like, okay, done. We'll disperse the troops. We'll just go back and live our lives. young Clifford and the ones that are on the king's side are like, we gotta tell the queen about this. And the queen comes in just breathing fire, and she's like, how could you disinherit our son like that? Are you crazy? Seriously, are you crazy? And the king is like, well, they made me to do it. They enforced me to do it. And she says, enforced thee? Art thou king and wilt be forced? I shame to hear thee speak. Ah, timorous wretch, thou hast undone thyself, thy son, and me, and given unto the house of York such head as thou shalt reign but by their sufferance, to entail him and his heirs unto the crown. What is it but to make thy sepulchre and creep into it far before thy time? Warwick is chancellor, and the Lord of Calais. Stern Falconbridge commands the narrow seas. The Duke is made protector of the realm, and yet shalt thou be safe? Such safety finds the trembling lamb environed with wolves. Had I been there, which am a silly woman, the soldiers should have tossed me on their pikes before I would have granted to that act. But thou preferst thy life before thine honor. And seeing thou dost, I here divorce myself, both from thy table, Henry, and thy bed, until that act of Parliament be repealed, whereby my son is disinherited. The northern lords that have forsworn thy colors will follow mine, if once they see them spread. And spread they shall be, to thy foul disgrace and utter ruin of the house of York. Thus do I leave thee. Come, son, let's away. Our army is ready. Come, we'll after them. And then there's a little smidgy more where he's like, yes, or the king is like, how can you leave me? And she's like, you disinherited our son. She says it again. And the king is like, but Edward, my son, will you go with her? And he's like, yeah, until you name me your heir, I'm gonna hang out with mom and go do that. And then the king is like, well, crap. And that's kind of the end of Act 1, Scene 1. So a lot happens in that scene, and it's an amazing scene, and it's probably much better when you get to hear all of the back and forth, that sort of thing. But also kind of ballsy in the first scene of the first act of the play to have the queen verbally divorce the king for having disinherited his son and go raise her own army, because that's what she's gonna go do. And we'll see how well that turns out in, well, starting tomorrow. I'll see you then for more. Mwah.